an episode of Stopping the Violence in America. My name is Zachary James Oliver, and I'm the Vice President of UPF, which is the major sponsor of this webinar. Uh, we had started this particular segment dealing with guns, gun violence, and the prevalence of guns within our communities and the nation at large. And we decided to kind of look at it from a different vantage point, and that was, what is the root cause of violence that will cause a person to pick up an inanimate object and hurt or kill his fellow brother or his fellow sister or his neighbor? And that became the platform that this webinar has began to use and to launch, because we feel that if we can get to the point of what becomes the incubator, if you will, the progenitor of why people do what they do, that picks up those particular guns and then harm and murder their fellow citizens, then we can get to the area of healing the nation and healing our communities. Now, of course, yes, we have to get a lot of those guns off the street. That's without being said. But we really want to go to what are the root causes that causes people so much anger that they will pick up, and insensitivity that they will pick up that particular gun and harm their fellow citizens. So this week, this segment is exciting. Today we have three people. Normally we have one or two people, but I had three people and I was inspired. And we're going to let me just go down the line and just tell you who are going to be some of the speakers. Of course, we had Taylor Cummings, and she was on before, and we were so excited about her presentation and the angle that she had taken in order to deal with crimes and the different violence in the communities, and especially her area was a targeted community. So in this segment, we will be dealing with the targeted, a specific demographics. We have all different demographics in this nation, this great nation of America. We have all sorts of people of all sorts of races. However, we want to look at the different pockets. One time we had a person who just shared with us about the whole Native American community, that demographics that a lot of us don't understand and didn't know about, and that was quite enlightening. But now we're looking at the Black and the Brown community is what we're targeting right now, which has in the areas of the violence that is prevailing in many of those particular communities. So we have Taylor, who is a PhD. She's working on her PhD on education and philosophy at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And she has a BA in social development and cultural exchange. And she's a Ed curriculum and instructor. We're going to have Dr. Howard Husak. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Now, I met him last week, I believe, at an event that the American Enterprise Institute was sponsoring with one of our friends, a friend of ours that we know, with Star Parker. But the theme of it was the state of Black America's progress, the state of Black America's progress. And it was quite innovative. He was one of the speakers. And let me just give you a little short background of how Husak is a senior fellow in domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on municipal government, urban housing policy, civil society, and philanthropy. Before joining AEI, Mr. Husak was the vice president for research and publications at the Manhattan Institute. He has been a director of case studies and public policy and management at the Harvard Kennedy School, a member of the board of directors of the Corporations of Public Broadcasting, and a journalist and Emmy-winning documentary filmmaker. And then the last but not least is a very excellent friend of mine, and I asked him to come on, and that's Jim Edgerly, and he's the director and founder of an extraordinary program, a webinar that he does, maybe on a weekly basis. It's called Higher Purpose Forum. And why I brought him on, he and I have been working for a couple of years now on the area of certain demographics in America, and that's between the situation of the Black and white problem in America and how we can bring some resolve to that. And so we looked at the historical perspectives of it, and then how we can bring it to the forefront and find some healing in that process. And he will give that synopsis as he comes up. So I'm going to give everyone 7 minutes each, and I would like to start off, if Taylor feels comfortable. I know that she might, but because I want her to hear this as well, because she needs to. I would love for her response, because I think it's in conjunction with a lot of things that she had shared in her last presentation with us. And I would like to have Dr. Husak to come on and share, but I would just like to read this last point here, say this last point, why I'm using this particular topic: hotbed becoming incubators for perpetuating violence in American communities. And what this does is we're understanding the dynamics of violence involved, acknowledging historical legacies, systematic challenges, and the urgent need for holistic solution. By addressing root causes and fostering community resilience, we can break the cycle of violence and create a safer space for all, and specifically for our nation, in which our nation, we know, influences the entire world. So I would like to have Dr. Husak to come on. It's great to have you. I enjoyed your presentation, and we look forward to hearing from you. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Oliver. I hate to upstage Taylor. She said she might have to go, but so I guess I just have to talk fast. But I'm here in New York. We all talk fast here. I'm going to talk about housing, and then I'm going to try to get around to your topic of violence and how it relates to subsidized and public housing, which tend to be, to use your words, hotbeds of violence. Why would that be? It goes by a lot of names: affordable housing, public housing, housing vouchers. Sometimes people just call it the projects. But all our housing problems policies dating from the 1930s until the present day have been, in my opinion, especially targeted toward, and I believe harmful toward, the interests of African Americans. They've lured Black households into dependency and long-term poverty, rewarded single parenthood, and led to the growing gap in home ownership and wealth between white and Black households. And violence, I believe, is a subset of all of that. Let me explain. Our housing policies have had these deleterious effects in a series of ways. Without much understanding, they have replaced and destroyed previously existing Black neighborhoods that were filled with Black-owned businesses, with homeowners, but they were labeled as slums. They were replaced with public housing projects where nobody owns anything. Blacks were and remain overrepresented, and by setting housing rules such that the more income you have, the more rent you pay, two incomes, that is marriage, are punished with higher rent, and defining affordable as subsidized rather than privately owned ownership building wealth housing. These unconsidered consequences date to the Franklin Roosevelt administration and the National Housing Act of 1937. Now, Franklin Roosevelt did a lot of good things. This doesn't happen to be one of them. The progressives of the New Deal were convinced that the private housing market was doomed to fail the majority of the population. The government had to step in and replace it. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt pushed especially hard for housing projects for African Americans. She was convinced that Black neighborhoods, segregated neighborhoods, needed to be replaced. She even came to Detroit to cut the ribbon on the first public housing project. It was named for Frederick Douglass. She was viewed as progressive as progressive for including Black Americans in something that she thought was benevolent. But the housing progressives misjudged what they were replacing. And this gets to why neighborhoods have become disorganized and, I believe, violent. Although we're often told that Black neighborhoods were substandard areas, census records tell us a different story. In Detroit, the Douglas and later the Brewster houses replaced a neighborhood known as Black Bottom. That wasn't because it was a racial thing. The original soil had been black and fertile. That neighborhood that was demolished, urban renewal, replaced by public housing, had no less than 300 Black-owned businesses, a high percentage of 1, 2, and 3 family homeowners, thriving branch of the Urban League and other self-help groups, and many, many churches, including the Bethel AME that was led by the Reverend C.L. Franklin. Yes, Aretha Franklin's father. All the effort that built Black Bottom aimed toward that goal of struggling toward self-improvement. By 1950, nothing was left but vacant lots, a highway, and high-rises that deteriorated so quickly that they had to be destroyed as well, torn down. The replacement public housing no longer stands. It's the same story all over Black America. East Harlem, Central Avenue in Cleveland, DeSoto Car in St. Louis, Bronzeville in Chicago. These were thriving, dynamic. Were they in perfectly good shape? No. But they had thriving social dynamics. In St. Louis in 1950, 2 low-income, predominantly Black St. Louis neighborhoods, later cleared for public housing. 34% of the housing was owner-occupied. 9% were multifamily structures where the owner was present. Similar numbers in slums, quote unquote, in Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland. The owner occupants used their rental income to help pay their carrying costs. Tenants aspired to own because, well, they had an example right in front of them. Those St. Louis neighborhoods were cleared to make way for the high rises of the Pruitt-Igoe public housing projects. Their designs won an architectural award when they opened in 1956. They were literally imploded in a cloud of dust in 1971, having become deteriorated and violence-ridden. Well, what should Mrs. Roosevelt have done instead? It was quite simply wrong to judge these poor neighborhoods narrowly on the basis of their physical conditions. They cried out for appreciation for their cultural life, their mutual aid associations, their social capital, their churches. Far better to have supported improvements that lacked rather than tearing them down. I'm writing a book on the history of public housing, and so I've been immersed in the Black press from that era, including the Pittsburgh Courier, was an African-American newspaper, and the Hill was the neighborhood that got torn down in Pittsburgh. Some of you may know the plays of August Wilson, the greatest American playwright of the 20th century. All of his plays are set in the Hill, which was torn down for public housing. The Pittsburgh Courier had a columnist named Paul Jones. He regretted the fact that there were dingy and crowded back streets on the lower hill. But, he said, what about the churches, the schools, the business neighborhood associations, the civic groups? All these are part of the whole problem of uprooting the lives of many people whose patterns have been labeled not desirable, not acceptable. That's how safe neighborhoods are created. When you have groups looking out for each other, when you have stores on the main streets, when you have merchants who know their clientele. Blacks instead were steered into public housing where none of that existed. Today, even as African Americans comprise 13% of the US population, they are 48% of public and subsidized housing. But isn't that a benefit, a way to reduce poverty? Well, no, just the opposite. Consider the rules which govern public housing and Section 8 voucher housing, in which the government pays the rent on a private apartment. Well, first, how do you qualify? The poor, and this is really important in terms of the violence topic, the poorest households get priority. that inevitably means single parent households, single mothers go to the head of the line. Today in public housing, 4% of households are comprised with two parents and children. We're in effect, subsidizing the formation of single parent households. Well, what's the relationship between single parent households, female headed households, and violence? We understand that when young boys don't have the strong role models of the father, they are at greater risk of joining gangs. If they're in greater risk of joining gangs, they're in greater risk of being drawn into violence. Then there's the upward mobility issue. Those in public and subsidized housing pay 30% of their income in rent. Boy, that sounds like a good deal, doesn't it? But that means if your income goes up, your rent goes up. Who would ever sign a lease like that in the private market? It's not a ticket out of poverty. It's a shackle that keeps one in it. Well, where does that leave us today? We need to signal to public officials that they need to stop doing anyone the false favor of trapping them in the gilded cage of subsidized housing. We need to restore and rebuild neighborhoods that are marked by vacant lots and food deserts. History needs to be their guide. Rather than building high-rise apartments on vacant lots, let's make sure our local laws permit the construction of small homes that local residents can afford to buy. Starter houses, maybe 2 or 3 family houses. Maybe they pay the mortgage by taking in lodgers. Those are the social connections that prevent violence. It's indirect, but I believe that it's a clear connection. Maybe some of those houses would have storefronts on the ground floors where the grocery stores and barbershops can set up. I'm trying to paint a picture here of a real neighborhood where there are people on the streets and kids walking to school in safety, where wealth is created through ownership and appreciation. Those were the old time ways, I guess, but they worked.
Thank you. I thank you for going over that very quickly, but I think the caveats and little nuggets that you left with us are incredible and something that we need to think about. When you think of the small neighborhood that you had said that had 300 thriving Black-owned businesses, where did that go? I mean, and I think one of the key points for that was the reason why when you have a hotbed or that incubator, if you will, of those type of projects, you're not seeing examples. Another word you use is role models. Those are lacking, and that becomes an incubator. So what I want to do is move over to Taylor real quick, and then have Taylor say something, and then after that, Jim, I want you to share, and then we have more of an open discussion and to hit your points, because I think you had some very valid points. Thank you very much. Taylor, are you there, or did she jump off? Know that she had to introduce. Okay, so Jim, if you can come on, I know Taylor had a conflict of interest, but schedule, and she said she might have to jump off for a minute because she's introducing someone, and then she will come back on. So why don't we go to Jim?
All right. Thank you.
Jim,
can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. I'm going to have to really fly through this, but I hope I'm being responsive to the conversation we had a few days ago in terms of the topic. And I really do feel this addresses the root cause issues of violence that you're predicating this series on. My title is Eliminating Violence Through Tribal Reintegration. And I've been working on this for about 4 years. And I really want to thank Reverend Oliver, our MC and our host, who has been very, very helpful in kind of advising and guiding my work. But I don't really expect him to agree with everything that I say today. So I'll let you off the hook there. But here's evidence that Reverend Oliver and I have a history right there. A beautiful picture of the two of us when we were in college together. So Reverend Oliver, you can't deny me. You have to accept the fact that we're associated with each other. All right. So first of all, we should really clearly understand who we are. We, as a species, are all from the continent of Africa. This has been very clear for the last 25 years or so, thanks to the work in genomics, and it developed a theory of monogenesis, which establishes that Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa beginning 60,000 years ago and actually formed three, we can call them macro tribes: the African tribe, the Asian tribe, and the European tribe. These are the three leading tribes of Homo sapiens. And the divergence from Africa started 60,000 years ago. So in other words, Homo sapiens developed together in Africa beginning 200,000 years ago and began to separate 60,000 years ago. And our country, the United States, is the place on the globe, you might say it's God's destiny, where the tribes reintegrate, reestablish a oneness as a family for the first time in human history after 60,000 years of divergence. That gives our country, in my opinion, great meaning, but many problems to confront, and violence is a symptom of these challenges we have. The three tribes are the Central Asian hunters that came here 13,000 years ago, and arriving at the same time were the European colonists and the enslaved Africans. They arrived at the same time, beginning in 1607, actually. The colonies began to be established in 1620. So we are dealing with the fact that there's separate tribes being integrated on our continent. What is tribalism? It's loyalty and devotion to one's tribe above all other groups. And the three primary tribes in our continent, in America, Europeans, Africans, and Asians. But the center stage for this experiment in tribal integration are the European and African Americans. And we developed in a profoundly different way over the 60,000 years that preceded our coming together here on the continent of North America. We are different externally, we are different internally, but we are not different genetically. So, originating from a common source, these three distinctive tribal migrations developed in unique and important ways in isolation over the past 60,000 years. So we see a process of the origin 200,000 years ago. We were divided during this period of migration for 60,000 years, and that accounts for almost 100% of human history. The time when we've been living together as tribes is only 0.2% of human history. And we came together, we were reconverged in a place that became called the New World. And, I would say that this convergence of tribes is a very, very significant importance for the future of humanity. And we can see that there's actually two kinds of countries. There's one kind of country that's pretty much committed to the hegemony of a single tribe. Most countries in the world are like this. There's one dominant tribe, and they're making no effort whatsoever at sincere and thoroughgoing tribal integration. And there's one country that at its birth was committed, has been committed in its very birth to tribal integration. That's our country. Right in our declaration, all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. And I would say that this commitment is not an American ideal. It is not a uniquely American vision. It does not belong to this country. This is a universal ideal that transcends time, that is understood clearly by all the people around the world who want to come here and be part of that vision that they understand very clearly. And the other place where you can find the same vision expressed in a very similar way is the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So we can see that the United States is sort of like a demonstration or an experiment of tribal integration. And there's two tools that have been developed in history. I would say they're inspired by God to promote this ability to transcend tribalism and unite as a country. That is democracy, which is the only political system explicitly devised, as I understand it, and I've done a lot of studying on this, to overcome tribalism. And the second tool is Christian love, the concept that came to us with our cultural heritage from England, that, and I'm sure there's elements of it that came also from Africa and from Asia, this concept of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And these tools should enable us to transcend tribalism in the ideals that we consider in unificationism of establishing a country with universally shared values, interdependence, and mutual prosperity. I'm not going to have time. But a tribe should be understood as a group that is established with a shared identity and a common purpose. And the purpose of that tribe is protection, survival, and prosperity. And this is deeply rooted. Tribalism has existed since the very beginning, began 200,000 years ago. And you might say it began to be dissolved only recently, beginnings when agriculture was established. But it's deeply rooted in our DNA, in our kind of instincts. Tribal mentality or tribal instinct is a core, universal, hardwired, often unconscious aspect of our nature. Human beings have always wanted and still want and need and even crave to be part of a group identity. It gives them protection, meaning, and purpose. And tribal awareness and morality is not the same as individual morality. So we behave different in groups. These understandings of tribalism are based upon these various scholars. And if you had to choose one of these to study, I would suggest Mark Pagel. You can find his presentations readily on YouTube. So tribalism has both healthy characteristics: shared identity, cooperation, loyalty, productivity, specialization, prosperity, and these enable tribes to create what's called a cumulative culture. But tribalism also has toxic elements. Tribes are suspicious of others. They're xenophobic. They can be oppressive, isolationist, parochial. And the fact is that sociologists understand that tribalism and democracy are not compatible. Tribalism is easily trumps democracy. It's much more deeply rooted, much more natural than the disciplines required in democracy. And violence can be understood as a primitive method for resolving tribal issues and threats between rival tribal groups, and when success is disrupted within the tribal group. So what we see in the United States is that the tribes in our country arrived, and right at the very beginning, there was a huge compromise made that disrupted a program or a plan or a destiny of tribal integration. And that was the creation of chattel slavery. And chattel slavery had to be justified in a Christian nation, and it was justified by an ideology that became known as racism. It's a 17th century ideology, and we can say that tribalism preceded racism. Racism is rooted in tribalism, and the person who has a lot to say on this subject is Thomas Sowell. So our foundation was in need of reconstruction from the very beginning of our colonial roots. The problem isn't in our Constitution. The problem is in the colonial foundation that was followed by our Constitution. And we have tried 3 times in history to reconstruct this foundation to enable us to succeed in our destiny as a place of tribal integration. The first time was in the Constitutional Convention, and it failed. We know the story there. The founders had a choice between trying to eliminate slavery and succeeding in creating one solitary nation, and they opted to create a nation. They realized that they could be one or the other, but not both. The second attempt, so that was the first attempt at reconstruction of the integrity of our democracy. The second attempt was following the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the passage of three very fundamental constitutional amendments, 13, 14, and 15. This was a second attempt at Reconstruction, and we know that that effort was completely undermined by 1877 by the Southern Democrats. And almost all of the gains beyond emancipation of tribal integration were lost by 1877. So tribalism once again defeated democracy. The third attempt, this is a little bit of detail on what happened during Reconstruction. If you really want to understand American history, my view is study between 1863 and 1877, and you'll understand a great deal about the contradictions of our history. The third attempt was the Civil Rights Movement. This is the third attempt in our country's history at Reconstruction. And we know that thanks to the leadership of the civil rights leadership and the civil rights movement, a profound new institutionalization of freedom was established. The Civil Rights Act of 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. This was the long attempted success at creating reconstruction of democracy in our country. And I'm not the only person that says this. Many people would say that we did not have democracy in America until the successful legislation as a result of the civil rights movement. That's why many of us would consider Martin Luther King as equal in standing to our founding fathers and Abraham Lincoln, because he was the one who completed the project under his leadership of establishing democracy. And therefore, we can safely say that it took 177 years for this reconstruction to take place. But I'm almost finished, Gregory. But we still see in our country that there is a lingering tribalism taking place that's creating tremendous amounts of dissonance in our culture. Somehow this problem of tribalism is not yet resulting in integration. So there's all this terminology now of white normativity, white privilege, and systematic racism, and that reflects some of the lingering toxicity of racism in our country. And as Reverend Oliver says in his papers and his talks, he has to raise, why does this continue? Why does this holdup never get fully resolved? And in my opinion, there's many ways of interpreting what happened following the murder of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. But one of them is continuing pent-up frustration that we're still dealing with unresolved tribalism and the failure to create true integration in our country. So I would say that following these three attempts at Reconstruction, each one of them made progress, but the one that finally brought us to, I would say, a full economic democracy, although it's still being threatened, especially in the area of voting rights, is the External Democracy Foundation is more or less intact as a vehicle for overcoming tribalism. The issue, in my opinion, that is still lingering behind is a lack of true spiritual, religious consciousness that allows us to create a brotherhood, sisterhood in our country across tribal barriers. And I would say that the issues that need to be brought to the fore to complete the work of tribal integration and creating a true brotherhood where all people are treated equally include a list something like this: the advocacy of a theology, a much more profound theology with a commitment to commonality and equality, a break of the cultural isolation. Those are often geographic and economic isolation of the tribes that remain separated from one another. The end of what is called a zero-sum mentality, which is an attitude among both ethnic and political tribes. We have not just a problem of ethnic tribalism in our country, we have a problem of political tribalism as well. I think we're all aware of that. That's the issue of the day. But tribalism is used by the pundits to describe the dynamics that are going on right now in our political system. These are the same behaviors. The attempt not to try to homogenize cultures, the differences of the cultures of different tribes, but rather to uplift tribal distinctiveness and uniqueness and value, because this independent development of these tribes, in my view, over that 60,000 year period, this is a process that was guided by human destiny, and it needs to be harvested and benefited from. There's also a need in our country to promote more one-to-one interaction between individuals of threatening tribes. And that is the work that I've become familiar with, because I've been involved to some extent with a group called Braver Angels. And that's one of the disciplines that they teach, is teaching people of opposing political tribes to experience together one-on-one interaction. And I've been through that process myself. Demonstration of commitment to cooperative and collective prosperity. This is a matter of economic policy that's needed in our country to transcend these divisions, and specifically creating a basis for synergy and shared prosperity that allow tribes to prosper, or these different social cultural groups to prosper by working together. There's plenty of evidence in our country that's that's possible to do. And finally, a topic that came up a great deal in Reverend Oliver's last meeting was this issue of healing. There is a great deal of healing needed in our country, and we can't ignore the need for dealing with that resentment and being willing to go through what's required to heal the wounds of this long, a prolonged issue of creating a tribal integration in our country. And I just conclude by saying that the areas where you see these asterisks are areas where my project, Higher Purpose Forum, is developing approach and content. Well, I rushed through that, Ziggy, but I think I did in close to 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there's a lot that we can say about that. I want to thank him for that, because he knows that I've done the writing on, and I call it the two brothers, and the three brothers, or the two tribes, and the white and Asian tribe. But this tribal, or these two significant individuals of different people, have always been in the book, the books of healing, which are the Bible and all of God's books. He always had two. And the two were important when they come together. They were opposites. And when they finally come together, they become the game changers. And I would call the linchpins for a better and harmonious society. But to come together is the struggle of that 60,000 years of separation, and if you will, having their own views and looking at themselves, who's more superior than the other one. But they all integrate into the topic of Mr. Howard. Howard Husak had just said about the aftermath of that is this, these housing projects and the insensitivity and not allowing those people to rise. Then we have violence, much more violence and holding violence. I would like to wonder if Taylor, are you there?
Like we lost her.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see her. I know that she had gotten the time. She's in the West Coast, so she was thinking West Coast time at 2 o'clock. So it's early in the morning. I don't know if her dad is there, if he can see where she is, and then we can continue the conversation as we go forward. Let's open it up, and then once she comes on, then we'll have her share some points, but she has some very valid points. But I'm excited about what been transpired. And the reason why I say that and why I brought Mr. Husak on and also Jim is because we do need to look at some of the root causes where violence can be incubated. And also, as being European Americans, it makes it even better people to maybe digest it and understand that it's not, we're just not trying to be, they always say that Jim used the word resentment. Yeah, people have resentment, but people have pain that they want to find healing with for, and so, and it expresses itself sometimes in a hostile way, or it expresses itself in just, just repressing themselves. So I just want to open up any for a little dialogue as we wait for Taylor to come back on to respond to Howard Husak and also Jim Edgerly's presentation. Wayne, welcome.
Oh, great presentation. Too short, way too short, but very good. This question is to Mr. Husak, and that is, in your studies and in your research, was there pushback from the Black community itself, from the newspapers that said, whoa, wait a minute, you've got it wrong? And did they have allies in their rejection of what Eleanor Roosevelt was aggressively pushing upon them?
I did. The answer is yes, and to the first, and not much in the second. As I said from the gentleman from the Pittsburgh Courier, he was quite representative of the Black press, which said, "Well, wait a minute, let's not go so fast here. Maybe we're losing something." But you have to realize this was the progressive view of the time, that the slums needed to be demolished, and anything that was a slum was physically offensive and had to go. And so it was 1949, President Truman signed National Housing Act. He wanted to build 800,000 public housing units. They came very close to that, and they destroyed neighborhoods all around the country. That's like saying interstate highways destroyed neighborhoods, and they really did. But that was the received wisdom at the time, is I think the best way to say it.
I remember that wisdom. I remember hearing that very mentality. That was the way everyone was thinking.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's something that you did say. Actually, it's I went to kindergarten. No, was it kindergarten or preschool on the Hill? I went on a hill. My father was studying, getting his master's degree, so
In
he was at
Pittsburgh?
University of Pittsburgh.
So you lived there in the Hill?
I was in the Hill. It was for a short time, but my first entrance into the school system was on the Hill.
Wow.
Well, so I remember that. Then at that time, I think it was like 50 something. The projects were still there because we were in those projects. I remember distinctly. For some reason, I also remember that's when I first got my vaccine shots. So I remember how devastated I was to walk in there. That's my first one. So yeah, I remember it clearly. Anyone else?
I
Go ahead.
imagine the school's been torn down since then.
I guess so. I haven't. We left Pittsburgh, and then we went to New York City, and that's where I was raised from there. But anyone else like to open up or share some points? Hey, William, welcome.
Thank you. I'd like to address two questions to Mr. Husak. Thank you very much for illustrating the relationship between property rights and property ownership and poverty. I would like to ask about the relationship between poverty and the federal programs called entitlements or welfare. From my knowledge, what the modern system of welfare we have now was created back in the 30s with President Roosevelt because prior to World War II, the economy was collapsing, and men had to go out on construction crews and travel around to many different cities and couldn't stay home in the same city with their families to raise money. Consequently, money was offered through the federal government to these men who were traveling. But after World War II, and especially after the 60s and 70s, when our economy became very strong, a tremendous powerhouse, to my way of thinking, that legislation should have been reversed so that the support that the federal government should give poor families should be to encourage the men to stay with their wives, their children, to keep the family strong. But it has, to my knowledge, still to this day, kept them apart. And I'm trying to understand, why would not those who are serious about civil rights not address this and try to encourage Congress to restore that legislation?
Well, public welfare is a big subject, and a lot of books been written about it. But when it began under President Roosevelt, it was called widows' pensions. So the idea was that women who were widows, single women, but they were thought to be widows rather than single mothers, were the likely recipients and those who were in need. It wasn't until the public welfare amendments of 1962 that income-based public welfare began in earnest, and it really ballooned between then and into the 70s and 80s. By 1990, there were 1.2 million persons on public assistance in New York City. 1.2 million.
Oh,
There has been a reversal, however. The so-called welfare reform of 1996, the Personal Responsibility Act, as part of its name, set a 5-year time limit on public assistance, cash public assistance. And since then, the numbers have declined pretty substantially. So it's not the same problem that we have. And in fact, my focus on housing, we spend more than twice as much on subsidized housing today as we spend on cash welfare. So, and as I said in my remarks, because you go to the head of the line for a subsidized housing unit and there's no time limit there, that's more of a source of dependency today than cash welfare, even though that was certainly the case in the past.
Thank you for those comments. Taylor is still struggling. She just texted me and said she's struggling because she's actually hosting another event. She got it confused because she was on West Coast time, thinking that the 2:00 was West Coast time, not East Coast time.
Tell us what she was gonna say.
Yeah, so let me go to one other person. I think with basically
Hey, Zachary,
yes.
let me take a stab at it.
Okay, good. Why don't you
Right.
come on? This is the dad who's a good friend of mine.
And,
Taylor,
and I don't profess, I
Huh?
don't profess to understand everything that Taylor talks about, or to definitely not to the depth, right, of knowledge that she has and is acquired over the years. But she has a unique perspective, and it's one that that is based in some of the origin of man, right? Talks about it just like Mr. Edgerly did, and says that it's foundational to our thinking and how we have evolved, and the factions that have devolved, created, and the tribalism that was created is, I think she would agree with you wholeheartedly about that. I think where the departure might be, or the nuance is about, we need to get back to that original consideration that we all come from one place. And so from that origin is the thing that binds us. And I think she goes even a little deeper down when her studies related to a sense of belonging and personhood and confidence and success, right? What that looks like. It's underpinned by that sense of self, right? That comes from now stuff and things and where we live and how we live. But it's also more importantly, as you said, the religious foundation or the spirituality or the essence of man really is bound by how we see ourselves in the universe. And that goes along science, right? And so she's been looking at science and looking at the brain, looking at how we interpret things, and then more importantly, how things, the thought and frequency and the foundations, right? Everything goes back to the foundations, and it gives us a sense of place and where we fit and how it fits. So I'll leave that there, and I think there's a spirituality element, and that's where the peace and the international commonalities with that's the essence, the underpinnings, what I think her studies is about. And how to quantify that is another piece, because she found UNLV because it was the only, after being frustrated with a master's degree at North Carolina school, I won't say which one, but because they didn't go deep enough. They didn't take into account all the factors that are acting on the educational system, and yet they were designing solutions for it, similar to what you were talking about with the housing, Mr. Hassad. I think that Howard mentioned that, you know, we create a solution based on what we know, what we think is our models or all of the factors, and we don't have it. Now we're starting to understand the multiplicity of factors that come to bear on a problem, a solution. And now we factor into that economics, right? Which has been the guiding factor, as you talked about, policy driven by economics, and in America, sort of a for-profit model that is underpinned by government, subsidized and promoted by government. And that has its consequences, right? And it allows us to come up with solutions that don't always keep things at the center, right? And I think that's where Taylor would agree with it. It's like what is integral and what is most centered needs to be centered. And I think the spirituality and the religious aspects, and I'm going to leave religion and spirituality separately, treat them separately. I think the essence of man and who we are and what we are is the thing that allows us to find the commonality that Mr. Edgerly talked about. But we have to deal with it within the context of the here and the now and those forces. And the more we start to understand it, I think the better off we'll be. And I think that the dealing with the economics of it, we are now at an age and a point in time where the planet is become important and our place in it. And so I think the economic models are shifting. And one signal for me was when BlackRock sort of, divested of all and pushed all its chips forward. First, Goldman Sachs in the social impact investing and with the anti-recidivism program, and now BlackRock and ESG for whatever that means. But it is really saying that there is an economic model that has to take into consideration our place on the planet, our place in spaces, and then how do we create a business model that or economic models that funds that, but then are also sustainable. And I think we've been, and I'm sort of tipping my hand a little bit. I've been talking to a gentleman that's out of California that's been with a homeless problem. Homelessness problem is out of control and across the whole country, and you guys talked about it. That the solutions come, or the potential solution comes in creating spaces, and then I'll also allowing individuals to have a sense of ownership and stake in building and creating that community, because that sense of ownership also has value, and it creates value in ways that we don't really haven't captured in our economic models, and the unintended consequences of fracturing families and the like, or what Mr. Husak mentioned is spot on. And so the question becomes, what do we do now, right? And so with the redevelopment that's happening with housing, let's use that because in the, infrastructure bill and the like, and I'm not talking politics here, I'm just talking about what do we do with the assets that we have on the table. And I think one of the most important things that we can do, because infrastructure is what it is, right? And it's driven by places where how the board is set and what the priorities are of the individual institutions, not just in our country, but in other countries. And it's a geopolitical conversation. And so everyone's going to do what's best in their quote unquote best interest. And for us here in the United States, I think we are in a great position. And I think that we have, by far, we have a very good experiment that's going forward. And I think we have an opportunity to make an enormous impact. So how should those dollars be spent? And I think that's the push and pull right now. There's a lot of money being pushed towards housing, but how that money is being deployed and how it's going is, I think, is the challenge. And I think that creating these spaces and this type of thinking that Mr. Edgerly and Mr. Hussett are speaking about, I think are at the center, except for one piece or a couple of pieces, is one of the pieces is about the climate and how do these spaces get developed. That's integral, and I think Mr. Hussett was alluding to that, and I hope would agree, and I'd love to hear his point on it. It needs to be climate smart. It needs to be take into consideration how we're going to make not just the places that we're building right now sustainable, but how it integrates into the infrastructure, and then also how does that infrastructure and the way that we're dealing with infrastructure impact the planet as a whole. And in the gentleman would say, California gentleman would say, the frameworks that we use needs to be very intelligent. And it also, these tools and this information needs to be centered in the community, and the community needs to participate. They need to be an active participant in the design, development of the communities. Because we're talking about, health, mental health. We're talking about not just where the bricks go and how they interrupt and how the water flows, but the concomitants of it all, how it all comes together. And it's a big idea. It's one that has been, I'll say to you, based on the conversations I've had in Midwest and in California, and even globally. I'll go there for a second, Zachary. I'll talk about Sierra Leone doing their digital transformation. How does that happen? How do you just do digital without thinking about how you build the community, leveraging those tools? All right. Because ultimately, what you place on that land is going to dictate a great deal about an impact for the people. So, so going back to, I think Taylor would just say that the violence piece, as we know, is part of that. The scarce resources, the buildings, how they impact mental health. And I grew up in New York. You didn't stare someone in the eye on a subway train. You didn't do certain things, and that didn't really understand it. But as you get older, you see, you recognize that that's part of your environment. It's caused by your environment. And so I think we have opportunities. I think we absolutely, and I'm deeply encouraged by the thoughts that are here, and the depth of thought that's been presented here around it, because it kind of put things in kind of brought some pieces together for me that I hadn't necessarily thought about in that way. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mr. Dexter. That's the dad speaking. So we're working on some projects together as we speak. But one thing I would like to say too, and I think I wanted to go to Mr. Husak and see, I think all of it is kind of integrated with this whole tribal concept as well. Eleanor Roosevelt, her intentions were good. It was benevolent, wasn't it? But I think she failed to see another aspect of when I was dealing with what they call it, the opportunity zones. Opportunity zones I liked because of the fact that it wasn't the government stepping in to control, but the government was just giving incentives for the people in a democratic society, which is talking about, will take their own initiatives and work together, not only to profit, but also to play an intricate role of allowing the stakeholders in those communities to become self-dependent and self-reliant and players in their own development. But they do need, which is a critical word, and that is access. And the access is hard to get when you're confined in projects, because it starts to mold who you are. And in front of BlackRock and a few other people, I had to give just a couple of presentations. And one of the things I thought about, I'm thinking about what you said, Mr. Husak, and what you said, Jim, of the significance of why the tribes came here. And I'm the pastor here, sort of the spiritual guy. So I can say that God had a plan, and
Yes.
he knew that the enculturation for those 60,000 years, if I bring my two children and my three children back into the Origin Division Union, into this new world, they can create what I've been trying to bring to this world from the beginning, a world of peace, a world of goodness. But you can't do it with one tribe alone. You have to do it with all tribes to come in and bring their unique entities together. And one might have more access than the other. So how do we work with each other to understand that? And because of the Jim, as he has put it, some tribes are more likely to think of their own is the best. So it's hard for them to think on a democratic mindset. So
Yes.
therefore, they might start doing things that will engender more violence. But
Yes.
then the other ones, on the other hand, who are stuck in there, they get in that environment, as Mr. Husek said, and they become violent almost within their own self. They're being imploding with violence. So just from my standpoint of looking at all this, and then I want to go to from other people, is her benevolent heart failed to see that don't just put them in create these projects and destroy a foundation, and didn't do enough research to understand what was the foundation that they were destroying. It might look from externally, as you said, it was considered a slum, but you had in one community, you had 300 thriving businesses going on. Now in these same communities with projects, you can't even find one business that is Black owned. One, so we need to address that problem. And then someone says, what is the solution? I always ask, what's the holdup? I know what the answer is, but I use it as I use it rhetorically, right? What's the holdup? So I just want to bring that to the table for a thought-provoking statement, and you can answer it accordingly. But I did see, before you answer that, I did see one hand up that I would like him to share. I'm extending the time 30 more minutes than usual. We're in at 3:30. And so you hold on to your thoughts, Mr. Husak and James, and then we'll ask Darrell Franklin to come on for a few seconds and share a few points. You're muted.
Wow, thank you so much, Reverend Oliver. And thank you all the guests who are on, who made the presentations and the points. Mr. Husak, I really appreciate what you were saying. Jim, wonderful. I really appreciate it. I'm so inspired, with the collaboration and understandings of the teachings about this whole dynamic in which we are in the process of going through together collectively towards restoring. And and what things that came up to me is that to some of the points that Mr. Husak was making, one of the things that showed up is that Robert Kennedy made a point about passing a law, if he would become president, that he would ban corporations for buying home properties, leaving it more available towards more middle class families to purchase homes. And so it creates an unfair ability for average and ordinary people to have real, sincere, genuine aspirations to become homeowners, right? So, so I'm just asking, I just brought that up, to Mr. Husak to see if that, resonated, with some of the points that he was kind enough to share. And then I really appreciate, Jim's point about underscoring this breach of this true spiritual consciousness that seems to have crept into the decision-making processes of the development, of our republic. And so this seems to have been an issue in which we ourselves are responsible to clean up. And because there is, and you all collectively touched on it, and also that other gentleman, I'm so sorry, the father, of that, of Taylor, and he brought up something very, very interesting, which is this one book, and I forgot his name. It's called Power versus Force, and he brought up that because we don't have the spiritual, because there's a breach in the spiritual consciousness, we seem to keep missing the point about having really adult conversations about, and so you got this hostility always showing up. And because this hostility continues to show up because of that breach of spiritual consciousness, what it does, it leaves us spiritually handicapped to the extent that we can't get to the point where we have collective consciousness to be able to find that place of healing, because there's a certain vibrational state of being that will allow us to be able to transcend our current state of being, that will allow us to be able to heal and come to that place of mutual prosperity. Because between all tribes, there it is. We can connect towards that. It's in the Asian, it's in the Black, it's in the descendants of the white European history. They all have that underlying understanding, a universal law, but we can't get there because there's a breach of spiritual consciousness. So thank you so much for allowing me to share that.
Great. Thank you so much. I just want to allow them to, before calling anyone, I want to allow them each to respond. Jim or Mr. Husak.
Well, I would say in terms of the late Eleanor Roosevelt, I think the kind of misguided benevolence continues today. And, the thought that, well, if people are doubled up, if people, are going through a hard time, we have to intervene and relieve them. And it may be that their struggles are how they make their way forward. We have to be careful about, I think Mrs. Roosevelt and the other progressives who tore down, the neighborhoods whose demise I'm lamenting, what they failed to understand, they've said, well, I wouldn't want to live there. So if I wouldn't want to live there, they must not be good places to live. Well, we need a broader view of that. And just today, we need a broader view. Economics, as one of the callers said, economics is not everything. As Dexter said, economics is not everything. You have family, you have culture, you have community ties, and they can compensate for a lack of income. And if we substitute income as the most important thing, we may be undermining some of those other ties that bind. And, you know, since our topic is violence, I do have to share this nugget. There are 178,000 public housing units in New York City. 178,000, probably between 500,000 and 600,000 people live in those units. They represent 4% of the city's population and 20% of the violent crime. 20% of the violent crime. And, you know, there are places where, you know, young black men are shooting other young black men every day. Every day. It's violence turned in on its own self. And the communities themselves and the structure of those communities is part of the problem. That's what I'm saying. As far as corporations buying houses, I'm not sure it's as they're not buying that many, and maybe turning away from that. But you know, I think people should save money no matter whether they're renting or owning, and you can invest money. And there are other ways to develop wealth besides owning a house, although that's a good one. And it's the attitude of deferred gratification, saving for the next, investing. That's all important. And being willing to marry. Where did that go? I understand the government discouraged it to some extent, but it's a terrible problem that we're not having the formation of family units, and that brings you back to violence.
Jim.
Thank you.
Well, I sort of like Daryl's reference to that policy of not enabling private investment groups to compete with families for ownership of the housing stock. In my travels, I see, because I do travel a lot, and there's a housing issue. Someone's mic needs to be turned up. There's a housing problem everywhere I go, and one of the problems is that housing prices are getting bid up by wealthy sources of income, and families who need homes cannot afford to buy homes. And one of the groups, for instance, that wherever I go, I hear about these consortium buying up homes are these private equity groups. So you have in our country a system where a few very, very wealthy people are getting more and more and more wealthy, and and so many people get left behind. I hate to present it as a zero-sum situation, but in the housing stock, it's a little bit like that, because it's not easy to finance construction of new housing. In fact, the biggest economic crisis we've had in recent decades was in 2008. That was a crisis over the defaulting of subprime mortgage loans, an attempt to finance subprime property development. That's my understanding of what happened there. This is a big challenge. So I kind of like the fact that Daryl brought that up. I think that's kind of an intriguing idea, because I'm sure there is a correlation, as Dr. Husick just said, between housing and violence. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
John O'Connor. You have your hand up. Please share or ask the question you would like to ask. You're muted. John, you're muted.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, this is for Jim. Question on when you talk about tribalism, at one point you talked about, of course, race is rooted in tribalism. But then at the end, you talked about, developing tribalism, getting the full benefits out of them somehow. So kind of wonder, well, how does that work? If you have racism is rooted in you, you want to get tribalism kind of disseminated or lessen the effect of tribalism. And also it's hard for me to understand, wouldn't tribe would be a community of families, and that's not bad, is it? So, this idea of tribalism is sound like it's all bad. It's all a negative kind of thing. I've heard it, people say, oh yeah, tribalism is here, it's there, it's everywhere. So the political system is of one because of that. So I wonder what can you address that a little bit? Give me a better understanding of how that all fits together.
Yeah, tribalism has been the basis for human community and progress and protection and survival for most of human history. Tribalism is actually essential for survival for most people. But it has both a healthy side and a toxic side because people are fallen. People do have, this is a view of man that I think is very important in any of these policy areas, that there's a contradiction within people. They have both godly aspects and they have evil aspects. And there's a downside to tribalism. And I think that's what I was hopefully trying to convey. Tribalism in itself isn't a bad thing, but it does have, like all other human behavior, can have negative consequences.
Now I wonder, with Brave Angels, will they start doing a black-white kind of pairing and use that instead of political high and low or conservative liberal?
No,
Get them
Brave
together.
Angels, Brave Angels is focused exclusively on red-blue tribal rivalry.
Okay, very
That's
good.
their expertise. Yeah,
Okay.
they're really, really making a lot of progress.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Husak, I was in a D Street project in South Boston when I was a quite young
I
college
know that
kid.
project. I lived in
Yeah,
Boston a long time.
Oh yeah, it was always Latinos and blacks and whites fighting all the time, just constant.
Well, and a lot of poor white people in the D Street projects too. So
Yeah.
people that think that public housing is all African American, well, that's not true. You can create these toxic environments involving anybody.
Right. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're coming almost to the close. I see that Dexter Cummings, Taylor's father. You have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to, and I'll try to keep it very brief, somewhat brief. So the idea, I wanted to address a couple of things. One is how to make a point that how we see ourselves and how big our tribe is matters, right? And it has profound implications about how we act and how we construct models, for example, housing and for economic inclusion, right? Or the economic models. It influences our economic model. And let me say that. And I think the broader sense, and I think we all agree, or the majority of folks on the call agree with the fact that the more broadly we view our tribe, the better off we are, right, will be. How we decide and develop our economic models sometimes is developed about our tribe, and for example, in the United States, in the macro, and then you break it up into the smaller subsections, and then you figure, there are economies within that, right? And it's all driven by, in the United States and even globally, by government supporting it. You see what China has been able to do by focusing on innovation, putting people to work, no matter how it impacts the rest of the world, or how there's a collective consciousness, right? Political consciousness and will around making those gains. And I think that we have, the United States has that opportunity as well. And I think this idea about, and I'm going to say the personal responsibility is sort of a red herring, and can be, because on the individual case, we're talking about how do we develop economic models and political economies that work, right? And work for whom? And I think that everyone would say we needed to work for the individuals, right? And we need now to work for the planet. Because without those two things, we don't really have much. And so we have to make some very key decisions about how we leverage the tools that we have currently, and how we point those things, what direction we point them in the arc that we take in connection with them. And I think in the United States, with the infrastructure bill and I'll just use that as an example. Right now, the economics of it and the business models that we're using to deploy them hasn't really changed all that much. We can talk about Justice 40. We can talk about, it's not necessarily race-based, but it's about a theory, an idea, right, about how we bring and deploy resources to the sections of our economy and to people in ways that allows them to, one, feel good about themselves included, and then two, also allows them the tools and the funding resources to be able to help design and develop, right, and be a part of that fixing or redevelopment of the economy and the infrastructure. And it's broken. I'll say that, and I won't go into details about that, but choice neighborhoods, this redevelopment and redevelopment and privatization to a certain degree of HUD, of housing. I've seen it in Harlem, where I used to drive by and it was tenements, now it's condos. And the question becomes, when do we take time, right, to say, okay, how do we create a model that doesn't allow for displacement? And then how do we deploy capital in ways and create models, economic models, that allows people to reap the value that's now being created in those communities as they're being transformed? And so for me, it's, and again, political economy. That's what it's all about. How do we take our economic model, political models, and allow that value to be created and then also recirculate into those communities where they come out of. And I think everyone would fundamentally agree with that premise. It's the question of how.
What everyone, thank you. It's very profound what you just said. And I have Dr. Jenkins come on, but before we do that, Howard Husak, did you want to say, look like you wanted to respond to that?
I just want to lean in and say, I think we have an essentially sound economic model in the United States. We're the most prosperous nation in the world. We're growing at a higher rate than China now. I don't think we would want to live in China with the overreach of that government. What we need to do is find ways to include everybody, to have everybody have the tools to participate, to be prepared educationally. As far as displacement and all that, neighborhoods change. People move to different places. That's the dynamism of America. But the fact that we have so many poor people sidelined, especially poor Black people, reflects a lack of our capacity to prepare and welcome people into our well-functioning economic system. I don't think we need a different economic system.
Dr. Jenkins, I would like to just give him, he's our president of here in the United States on an international scale for UPF, which is the sponsor of this particular webinar. Welcome, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Reverend Oliver. I really appreciate this program and all you're doing every week. And Howard, thank you, and James. I really love this discussion. It's so positive and hopeful. Howard, you wrote a commentary years ago that Ben Carson was right. I really appreciated that. I met Dr. Carson a number of times before he ran for office. And what a refreshing person he was. His testimony was that he had such a good mother and she really cared about him reading.
and she emphasized reading and reading and reading. And even though she couldn't read, she graded his little reports on what he read. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I think that this is a very encouraging discussion. I think that all the tribes coming to America, I believe in that. I think it's some kind of a destiny. It's not just by chance. I love Howard saying that our economic model has good conditions to it if we learn how to, have the tools. I saw this idea of social engineering is really dangerous. I worked with there's some gang members we got to know. Uh, Reverend Oliver, you know some of them, and in Chicago. And one of them is just working so hard he's come out of the gangs 20 years ago, but he's really working with young people. But I asked him what's changed over time. And he said, you know, what really changed was the fact that they tore down Robert Taylor homes. And that was a community of tens of thousands of people. In fact, one of our closest friends, Pastor T.L. Barrett in Chicago, grew up in those Robert Taylor homes with a good mother, strong mother, and a strong father. And but even those that didn't have a strong two-parent family, still the opportunities were great. And he's become such a loving, universal person. But our dear friend, the former gang member, he said that when they tore down the Robert Taylor homes and the idea of giving everybody a better housing and to give everybody a better opportunity, it really caused a lot of increase in crime and destruction, because the thing that the families in the neighborhood, everything was spread out and people were moved to different parts of town. It was a tragedy, because the housing isn't what makes people good or difficult. It's really deeper than that. So I'm encouraged by this. I think that there are solutions. And so, Howard, what do you think about this journey we're on? Because I'm concerned now. One of our programs that Reverend Oliver had was quite a shock to me when one of the police officers he had on from Georgia mentioned that one of the most devastating things he saw in the communities was the fact that people are on social media all the time, and the voice of the church is completely is really not strong to young people at all. There's no central point of the voice of ethics and God and faith and that kind of thing. That voice is not heard anymore because people are listening more to their iPhones and everything than anything else. And I really felt like, wow, that's a dangerous situation. What is guiding the thinking of our youth and all people? Even it doesn't matter what tribe you are or what race you are. This influence of information is really, really serious. But it's refreshing to have a program like this where I see that we can celebrate the good things of our society, and we need to find ways to better enhance, the family experience, the experience for our residents. We have also another good friend in Chicago, Congressman Danny Davis, who always lived right in the neighborhood, and he's just such a loving guy, a loving person. And you don't hear him shouting, angry shouts against other parties or anything like that. He's never like that. He wants to cooperate. He wants to, and he does. He gets so much legislation passed. So thank you for that. But Howard, what do you think? What's the most positive thing you see on the idea of our neighborhoods? In fact, poor neighborhoods have their role. And like Ben Carson said, it's not a good thing to just take out those neighborhoods.
Well, I'm not sure I would defend the Robert Taylor homes. They were crime-ridden, gang-ruled. People were dispersed, but it was kind of a fundamental mistake to build them in the first place. But that's a different subject.
I agree with that. I think it was wrong to build those. It was the social.
As far as the tribes go, we should be proud of our own tribes and not negative toward the other tribe. That's the fundamental. As far as social media, religion did a good job of getting onto TV when TV was a new thing. So I bet there's some, Rick Warren and some other guys, they'll figure out how to get on social media too, maybe. I don't know. But I'll tell you this, it all comes down to the parents in the end, doesn't it? If the parents are not supervising what those children are doing on social media, I have grandchildren, I talk to them, what are you doing on that iPhone? What are you playing some game? Who's the other end of that game? And they can answer me when you ask them. So parents have to ask their kids, and there's no substitute for that. There's no substitute for the involved parent, and there's no government program that's going to substitute that. We've proved it.
Very good. Yeah.
I got to sign off, but I hate to leave you, but I got something else scheduled after 3:30, so I'm going to have to sign off. But Godspeed to everybody, and it was really great to get to know everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming on. And you did
Thank
say the
you.
last word. I wanted you to say you guys to say the last. We always have that. So thank you for saying those words. And we look forward actually for you to come back on, and we can work on some other collective projects or dialogues.
Well, we already solved so many things today. We'll have to solve the rest of them. Brave Angels is a great group. Really good
yes.
group. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you for coming on. All right. As we come to conclusion, thank you so much, Reverend Jenkins. Just like to say what I didn't say in the area of me speaking in front of BlackRock was that I mentioned that I love that program, Trading Places, with Eddie Murphy. It was such an excellent program because they just took this homeless guy out from the community, and he traded places with these guys on Wall Street, and he made his first prediction was based off understanding his demographics, his environment, and that catapulted the stock market, and they won, and they got so much money. What I meant by that is that, as I always say, housing those hotbeds in those projects are walking geniuses as well. They just don't have that access, and they don't have the proper environment to cultivate their geniusness. They don't have the economics, and they don't have, it's a difference. So we're looking at how we can begin to heal that and to change those paradigms. So I want to thank everyone for coming on. I would just say, Jim, if you want to just say a last couple of words in reference to, in behalf of his daughter. You can imagine, look at the dad, he's a great speaker as well and great mind. So the daughter, is even better. So sorry we didn't get a chance to hear her, but she spoke to us a couple weeks ago, and she did an extraordinary job. That's why we wanted her to come on back with you. But maybe later on in the year, we'll bring everybody back to discuss some more and embellish upon what we're discussing now. So Jim, if you want to just say one last word. And I didn't hear from Madeline, but I saw Dr. Madeline. She didn't say one word, but she's always welcome to come on and say a last word as well. Jim.
The only thing I would like to say is that I tried in my presentation to differentiate the solutions that I outlined in the last slide explicitly from the solutions presented in what's called deconstruction. Deconstruction actually antagonizes tribal rivalries. It doesn't integrate tribes. So I hope that I was able to convey that today as my view on this issue of creating depolarization in our country, which would reduce violence.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, Dexter, you want to, on behalf of your daughter, just say the last word, short.
Yeah, the I don't know where to start. I'll try to keep it short. I think that we're all in the same pool. I just think that we're looking at it through, again, different lenses. And for me, it does land with economics. And some of the someone mentioned about BlackRock changing. ESG is a name, and what we'll find is a lot of the portfolios and the investments are going to be around trying to get greater understanding about people and financing how we keep or how to create financial models around the planet. And I think those two things are inescapable. And so I think that while we may have differences of opinions and we may have different perspectives, I think ultimately where we are with the technology, it's all, we have AI and the like replicating human behavior. We have technologies that are getting closer and closer to understanding how from whence we came. And I think as those things drive us, we're going to have to be able to deal with and create those models that are not based on simply what we see, right? But what we know. Right? And I think that's that data-driven solutions are going to be the things that actually drive us. And I think that involves some of the things that I've talked about here and that Taylor talks about in the spirituality elements. We're going to have a deeper understanding about how connected we are. And then those solutions will hopefully allow us to converge in a place that will hopefully allow us to thrive. And I agree, the United States is the greatest. We have the greatest opportunity. And I've talked to people who work for UNDP, and he's been all over the world, and he lives in Switzerland. And he says there's no better place than the United States from where he'd like to live and where he'd like his kids to grow up. And it's for that reason, the melting pot and the opportunity that it provides. So I think we all agree on that. And so it's just about how we go about it.
Oh, great, great.
For that. Last word from Dr. Madeline. A few words. How are you? You're unmuted. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Greetings, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Oliver. This program was very enlightening. Fantastic dialogue across the board. And my eyes of understanding was open. I was able to glean from each person's perspective, and that allowed me to grow and see this for what it is and not what I want it to be. And I think as we come together collectively and continue to live and learn from one another's aspects, facts, and journey, we'll be able to come together and do something really amazing as we move forward. So thank you. Thank you so much, each and every one of you, for your tenacity, because you put some work in. Jim, I would like to have a copy of that PowerPoint. I took pictures as fast as I could, but you kept clicking, kept going. So
I only had Reverend, he only gave me 7 minutes. I did the best I could.
You did a good job. You did a good job. And for Taylor's father to fill in for her, I appreciate his knowledge. You know, it lets me know that he works closely with his daughter and he's very aware of what's going on in society. We all know that it's not a black and white issue, it's a green issue. It is about the economic pool. So as we move forward, as we continue to lean on each other and glean understanding, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. It has to get better. Yes. So thank you. Good to see you, Dr. Jenkins, as well, and everyone else that's on the line. Peace and love.
Wow. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, also for coming on and making some comments. And just want to thank you all, and Reverend Franklin and William and everyone who has spoken. And just wanted to close with this. We're just looking at it from the vantage point and how we can begin to reduce violence always we have talked about that some of these things are root causes that spurs violence. How do we begin to heal whatever that root is so that we can begin to reduce violence in our communities, in our nation, and ultimately, as I said, America influences the world. No matter what they say about America, you know, America influences the world. So let's continuously to work together to find all the healing points that are needed, necessary, so that we can begin to change this nation, change our community, and become brothers and sisters. Because my dad told me from the beginning, since I was 5 years old, that the problem is that the Black and white people don't know that we're brothers because we come from the same God. He said, once we understand that, that will change the dynamics and the influence and the power in a negative way of tribalism. Amen. God bless you, and thank you so much for all that you have shared and everything. Always, we had Mama to come in, the mother. We didn't hear the feminine voice to come in, and she came in and summed it up. Thank you so much. God bless you, everyone. See you next week.
Take care.
God bless you all. Thank you.
God bless.
That was awesome. Awesome dialogue. Really appreciate everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you, Dexter.
All right, take care.
Yes,
All right,
thank
bye.
you, Reverend Oliver.
Okay.
Thank you, Reverend Oliver, and God bless
You're
those behind the scenes, Nadia and
Yes.
EJ. Thank
Nadia,
you so much
yes,
for all that
yes.
you
Yeah.
do. Yes.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
All right. God bless.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. All right. Take care. God bless.